January 1949. A train somewhere between St. Louis and Chicago, 9:15 in the evening. The Illinois Central overnight runs north from New Orleans, stops in Memphis, stops in St. Louis, continues to Chicago, arriving at 6:47 in the morning if the weather is cooperative and the schedule holds. The weather in January between St. Louis and Chicago is not always cooperative, and the schedule does not always hold. But the train runs regardless, because the train has been running this route since 1851 and has developed a certain position toward the weather. Roy Rogers is in car 9, seat 44.
He is going to Chicago for a performance at the Chicago Theater. 3 days, 2 shows a day, the kind of engagement that his manager books in January because January is a slow month for other things, and Chicago in January is the kind of city that fills theaters regardless of the month. He has done this engagement before. He knows Chicago in January. He has made a reasonable peace with it. Seat 43 is the window seat. There is a woman in it. She is old, 70, maybe 75, with white hair pinned back with the precision of someone who has been doing this particular task for 50 years and has it exactly right. She is wearing a dark coat and dark gloves, and her hands are folded in her lap over a small wooden box, approximately the size of a shoebox, made of plain pine, unadorned except for a small brass latch on the front. She is looking out the window.
There is nothing to see out the window. The Illinois dark goes past at 60 miles an hour, interrupted occasionally by a farmhouse light or a road crossing signal, not enough to constitute scenery. She is looking at the dark. Roy Rogers sits down in seat 44. He opens his newspaper. He does not look at her. She does not look at him. The train continues north. He notices the box at Cairo, not in the way of noticing something unusual, in the way of registering something that has been in his peripheral vision for 40 minutes and that he has not yet fully processed. A small wooden box, her hands folded over it. The way her hands are positioned, not holding the box exactly, more resting on it, the way a person rests their hands on something they want to keep track of, even when keeping track of it is not necessary. He thinks about it for a moment. He goes back to his newspaper. At Centralia, he folds the newspaper. He looks at the dark Illinois going past the window.
He says without turning to look at her,
"Is that a long way to carry something?" She turns from the window. She looks at him. She recognizes him in the way that people recognize Roy Rogers. The hat gave it away before the face. The hat being in an Illinois Central overnight car in January of 1949, the kind of hat that arrives before its owner. She says, "I know who you are." Roy Rogers says, "Yes, ma'am." She looks at the box. She says, "It's my husband." Roy Rogers says, "I'm sorry." She says, "He died in October." Roy Rogers says, "Were you married long?" She says, 51 years. She says it the way people say a number when the number is not a statistic, but a weight. 51 years, the specific gravity of it, the way it sits in the air after she says it and does not dissipate. Roy Rogers says, "Where are you taking him?" Her name is Edna Marchand. She is 73 years old. She grew up in Chicago on the north side, the daughter of a man who ran a dry goods store on Diversey Avenue and who believed in 2 things absolutely: the importance of keeping accounts and the importance of attending church on Sundays, and who communicated both beliefs to his children with equal conviction. She married Franklin Marchand in May of 1898 at a church on Paulina Street. They were supposed to have the reception at a restaurant on Michigan Avenue that Franklin had been saving for since December. 2 weeks before the wedding, the restaurant closed. They had the reception at her parents' house on Paulina Street, which was a good reception, and which Franklin always said was better than the restaurant would have been, and which Edna always agreed with while privately not entirely agreeing. In September of 1898, Franklin's company transferred him to St. Louis. They went to St. Louis.
They intended to come back to Chicago. Everyone who leaves Chicago for St. Louis intends to come back to Chicago. They had a son in 1901 and a daughter in 1903 and a second son in 1907. And the children grew up in St. Louis and had their own lives in St. Louis. And the return to Chicago kept being the thing they were going to do when the circumstances permitted. And the circumstances kept not quite permitting. And then the children were grown, and the reasons for the return had changed. And then it was simply a habit of intention that they had maintained for 50 years without executing. Franklin died in October. He was 78 years old. He died in the house in St. Louis where they had lived since 1912. When Edna was going through his papers, she found a note he had written. Not a letter, not addressed to anyone, just a note in his handwriting on a piece of the stationery he used for personal correspondence. It said, "I should have taken her back to Chicago. I meant to. I always meant to." Edna read this note. She sat with it for a while. Then she made a decision. She tells Roy Rogers some of this, not all of it. The note she keeps to herself, the way some things are kept. But she tells him about the church on Paulina Street and the restaurant that closed, and Franklin's transfer in September, and the 50 years of meaning to come back. She tells it the way someone tells a story they have been carrying for a long time, with the particular ease of a person who has been waiting for the right moment and has decided this is close enough. Roy Rogers listens. Outside the window, Illinois goes past in the dark. A water tower, a crossing signal, a grain elevator catching the moonlight. The things that are there at 60 miles an hour and then gone. When she finishes, he says, "What are you going to do when you get to Chicago?" She says, "I'm going to take Franklin to Paulina Street, to the church where we were married. And then I'm going to take him to see the restaurant that wasn't there in 1898. There's something there now. I looked it up. It's a different restaurant, Italian. And I'm going to eat dinner there." She says, "And then I'm going to take him to the lakefront. We always said we were going to walk on the lakefront when we came back. In May, we said, when the weather was right. But January is what I have, so January is what it will be." Roy Rogers says, "Is there someone going with you?" She says, "My daughter wanted to come. I told her I'd go alone." Roy Rogers says, "Why?" She looks at the wooden box. She says, "Because this part is just for us." Roy Rogers is quiet for a moment. Outside, the train crosses a river. The particular sound of a train on a bridge, the brief metallic articulation of the wheels on the expansion joints, the river going dark below. He says, "The restaurant on Michigan Avenue. Do you know the address?" She says, "I wrote it down somewhere. It was on the corner of Michigan and Monroe, I think." Roy Rogers says, "And the church, Paulina Street." She says, "St. Alphonsus. It's still there." He nods. He says, "Chicago in January at the lakefront is cold. Do you have a coat heavier than that one?" She says, "This is my heaviest coat." He says, "Do you have gloves heavier than those?" She says, "These are my warmest gloves." He considers this. He says, "You might need a scarf." She says, "I have a scarf in my bag." He says, "All right." She looks at him. She says, "You're going to tell me I shouldn't go to the lakefront in January." He says, "No, ma'am. I'm going to make sure you have a scarf."
She looks at him for a moment. Then she looks out the window. She says, "He would have liked you." Roy Rogers says, "I believe he was a good man." She says, "He was. He was a very good man." She says, "He kept his accounts, and he went to church on Sundays, and he always meant to come back to Chicago, and meaning to was the best he could do, and I think that's enough. I've decided that's enough." Roy Rogers says, "Yes, ma'am, I think it is." They talk for another hour, not about Franklin specifically, though Franklin is present in every exchange the way a recently lost person is present in the conversations of the person who lost them. Not as a subject, but as a context. Everything filtered through the awareness of the absence. They talk about Chicago. Edna tells him about the North Side in the 1890s, the way the city was then, the things that were there that are not there now, and the things that are there now that were not there then. She has the specific knowledge of someone who left a place when she was young and has been maintaining a fixed version of it in her memory while the actual place changed. Roy Rogers tells her about performing in Chicago, the theaters, the way Chicago audiences receive a Western show, which is warmly and with the specific appetite of a city that has a complicated relationship with its own frontier mythology and works it out through Saturday matinees. She laughs at this. It is the first time she has laughed, Roy Rogers thinks, in some time. Not because she has been severe. She has not been severe. But because laughter has a quality when it has been absent for a while, a slight surprise to it, as if the person laughing is remembering something they had set aside. She says, "Franklin laughed easily. He laughed at things that I didn't always see the humor in, and then he would explain why they were funny, and then I would laugh too, but later, when he wasn't looking, because I didn't want to give him the satisfaction." Roy Rogers says, "That sounds right." She says, 51 years of not giving him the satisfaction. She says, "I should have given him more satisfaction." She is not sad when she says this. She is exact. The way people are exact when they have had 3 months to think about something and have arrived at a position that is both honest and at peace. The train pulls into Union Station at 6:51 in the morning, 4 minutes late. The January Chicago air arrives the moment the doors open, not with any ceremony, just present. The particular combination of cold and lake wind that Chicago produces in January that is its own phenomenon and cannot be adequately described to people who have not experienced it. Edna Marchand stands on the platform with her bag and the wooden box. Roy Rogers stands beside her. He says, "Do you need help getting a cab?" She says, "I know how to get a cab." He says, "I know you do." She looks at him. She says, "Thank you for the company." He says, "Thank you for the story about the restaurant." She says, "It was supposed to be a good restaurant." He says, "I'm sure the Italian place is good too." She says, "We'll find out." She picks up her bag. She turns toward the cab stands. She stops. She turns back. She says, "What you said about the meaning to, that it's enough." He says, "Yes, ma'am." She says, "I don't know if it's true, but I'm going to find out." She turns back toward the cab stands. Roy Rogers watches her go. The dark coat, the white hair, the bag in one hand and the wooden box under the other arm, walking through Union Station in January toward a cab that will take her to Paulina Street and the church and the restaurant on Michigan Avenue and the lakefront, which will be cold in a way that requires a scarf, which she has in her bag. He watches her until she is through the door and gone. Then he picks up his own bag. He goes to find his hotel. He has a show at 2. Edna Marchand lived until 1963. She went back to Chicago 3 more times, once with her daughter, once with her granddaughter, Once alone when she was 83, and her daughter said she was too old to travel alone, and she went anyway. Each time she went to St. Alphonsus on Paulina Street.
She never went back to the lakefront in January. She went in May, the second time, which is when she and Franklin always said they would go, and she said it was exactly right, the weather and the lake, exactly what they had always meant to do. She left Franklin's ashes in St. Louis, at the house where they had lived since 1912. Her daughter has the house now. The ashes are still there. She said once, to her granddaughter who asked, that she had taken him to Chicago and shown him what he always meant to see, and that was enough, and that he didn't need to stay. The granddaughter asked, did he like it? Edna said, he would have. If this story reached you, drop your state in the comments. A new King of the Cowboys story every day, because they still make men like him. You just have to know where to look.